Welcome to Against the Tide, the podcast where extraordinary change makers share their stories and their wisdom. Against the Tide is a celebration of courageous women who defy expectation to create lasting impact by daring to forge their own paths. We'll dive deep into powerful themes such as the complexity of identity and how it influences the choices we make, embracing change even when it feels uncomfortable, and how breaking free from labels can unlock your true potential. Join me, Jo Metcalf, to hear stories of incredible women who, by swimming against the tide, prove that extraordinary things can happen. I'm thrilled to welcome Tanya Arnold to the podcast. Tanya is a trailblazing sports presenter and journalist. She played a pivotal role in getting more women on screen in places long dominated by men. During Tanya's time at BBC Look North, she wasn't just the only woman, she was often the only sports journalist. The level of isolation could have been crushing, but Tanya carved her own path with grit, professionalism and pure talent. In this conversation, Tanya opens up about the mindset and principles that sustain her, and about learning to embrace what makes her different. Whether you're pushing boundaries in your own field or seeking inspiration when the odds are stacked against you, Tanya shows us that true success belongs to those who dare to forge their own paths. This conversation will leave you feeling ready to swim against the tide of society's expectations. Welcome, Tanya. Thank you so much for joining the podcast today. And I'll apologise with my Yorkshire accent. It's Tanya today. Is that okay?
That's absolutely fine. To be honest with you, I get quite confused these days when actually I hear people say Tanya, because broadcast-wise, I've pretty much always been Tanya.
Well, we'll dive straight in if that's okay with you. And can you tell us a bit about your background and your early years particularly, and how they influenced your journey in sports journalism?
So I was a tomboy, which I don't think would be a surprise to many people. Loved football and cricket, but at a time when women really didn't play football and cricket. So played with the boys in the playground until that was no longer allowed. And the other thing that I did love when I was a kid was the theatre. Parents used to take me to the theatre, and I think if you do see a join when I did finally do sport, because a lot of people, why did you really like sport? What do you like about sport? And it's that great unwritten drama and the emotion and the storylines that go into sport. I'm not really a stats person. You can put the stats of a half up, and some of them are vaguely significant or might tell a story. But I'm very much the people. And a good sports event, you don't know the ending. You are living the ending with the people who are taking part in it. So those are the kind of interweaving, but I had no thought that this was what I was going to do because women didn't do it. So I did an English and Theatre Studies degree. I worked on the university radio station. My mum actually suggested I did a postgrad in broadcast journalism, so I did that for a year. But again, I went in as a news journalist. I did a sports module and did a 20-minute radio documentary about boxing, but I think 2 and 2 didn't add up at that point because women didn't do it. So I went into news for 5 years and was very lucky, really, that the sports reporter for Look North at the time went on an attachment in the BBC just for 6 months. So they didn't advertise the job externally because I think if they had, there's no way I'd have got it because people with a huge amount more experience would have gone for it. But they didn't. So I had 6 months doing it before he announced that he wasn't going to come back. So I was the sort of sitting candidate by that point. And lo and behold, they had a female sports reporter, which I don't think Look North ever really clocked, to be quite frank, that they were the first. And for a long time, the only.
Fantastic. You talked in there about being a tomboy, and that definitely resonates. I was one of 2 girls, and I was the second girl, and I was definitely the one that was like getting to sport, and that was my in with my parents. But how has that identity sort of driven you through your life?
I don't think it's necessarily driven me. I think it's just kind of who I just always loved sport, and I don't know. My dad loved cricket. I went to cricket. Used to go and watch cricket. I was brought up not far from Lords, so I used to go and watch Middlesex play, and then later on Kent. I loved football. My dad sort of followed football, but my mum was terribly anti it, and my mum very much wore the trousers in our household. So, you kind of, I followed it, but quite quietly. And there was grandstand back in the day on a Saturday afternoon. So I consumed that whole range of sport, which I think you can't do as much now. But you'd watch, that was my introduction to rugby league, because they'd have rugby league on every week on muddy pitches in the north of England. And I just had a love of it. I don't sort of knowingly think it shaped me. It's been a party trick that I could walk into a room full of men and hold a conversation about football. But I'm not sure it necessarily shaped me as such.
How has your identity evolved over the years as you've gotten older?
I think it took me a long time really to, I'm a woman with a slightly deeper voice, which thank God social media wasn't around when I came through. And my mum wasn't, she didn't teach me about makeup, clothes. I didn't wear a skirt for years and years and years. So I think it took me a long time. And when you're on television, learning how to do that, that's quite a weird place to be. So I think growing into my own identity as a woman took quite a long time. And to have there are still times, evening dresses and things like that. I'll go and buy something glittering and I'm like, that's me in a glittery dress, a little bit still.
And how do you feel now within that?
Oh, yeah. The thing I kind of find tedious about telly is the worrying what you're going to wear. And we do, I do worry about what I'm going to wear and what I'm going to look about, but also being warm. Marrying those two. Essentially, I'd be there in ski clothes, I think, if I possibly could. And I sort of do it, but I find it slightly tedious.
So you've talked a little bit about being the first, but when you started out, there weren't many women doing what you do. What does it feel like being a pioneer in that space?
I think when you're doing it, when you're in it, you're just... I wasn't an experienced reporter by any stretch. I'd come through a 1-year traineeship across radio. I'd then worked as a researcher. You then move up to what was a regional journalist. All those things have gone now, but you very much kind of worked around. I'd done very little reporting as such when I got the sports reporter's job. And essentially, you've got a brief in the way that, there's health and home affairs. Though sport is never looked on in the same way. I was never a correspondent. But you suddenly are not only are you reporting, but you're also looking after the whole of the brief. And that was one of the big differences, I think, with sport. It was a big thing to suddenly be landed with. So I was just head down, hell for leather trying to do it. It's not until you come out the other side, I think, towards the back end of your career, and particularly when I left the BBC, that I thought more about it.
And being a woman, how did that impact you within that space?
It was lonely. That was the most, when I look back, it was lonely because, your entire working day, I was back in the office, obviously there were other women, but when you're out on the road and you're doing the job, and at that point, all the camera crews were all men as well, you were always the only woman, which was quite difficult at times, particularly I think around football, the odd time around rugby league, you were... You just kind of looked at a bit, some remarks. I will always say I was very, very lucky that social media was not a thing, so I didn't have to handle what that was. People had to write a letter if they didn't like me, and that would have gone to the editor and not me, generally. I mean, I got the odd one. So, it's not until I kind of look back on it, I think, that I think it was lonely. And one of the things that I realised was that it wasn't just lonely when I was at press conferences or all of that. Actually, it was really lonely in the office, because sport in the newsroom that I was in and all the way through on the whole, it wasn't they weren't into sport. And a lot of them look down on sport as a journalism. It's not economics. It's not going to, you're not going to lead the program unless somebody gets promoted, and that's just because it's and it was looked down on, and particularly looked down on actually by the other women in the newsroom. So that turned me into somebody at times I didn't like, because you were always fighting for your place and fighting that what I was doing, should be in your program.
Interesting. And how did that loneliness impact on you personally?
I'm not somebody who sits there and thinks about stuff like that, which might sound odd, but I literally, I will repeat again, I had my head down trying to do the job.
Can you provide some examples of what it feels like when you've been pushing against the tide in your career?
I don't think there's kind of singular moments for me in that. I think it was it was a one woman just do push. I think there's a point where you look around you, and there's an element of relief that you're not the only one anymore, and that I have really, really loved. I think it was probably the constant push to be respected. I've never been somebody who thought, you should be respected because you're put in that position. I mean, you will come across people who are put into leadership roles, and just because they're there, you're expected to respect. I'm sorry, I need to trust you. You need to earn your respect. But I was pretty darn sure I'd earned that, but I was still fighting and fighting. And I think that was quite a constant, actually, throughout a lot of what I did. Certainly in the day job. The lovely thing for me actually was rugby league, which I didn't feel that ever. And that's where I've worked at the highest. I never had that feeling. I had a couple of incidents with a couple of coaches where they treated me like, they were just plain. One was just plain bloody rude. But on the whole, rugby league's been incredibly welcoming. And respectful. Claire Balding was in when I went in, which helped, and did a brilliant job presenting rugby league and with huge amounts of enthusiasm. But I mean, that's actually was almost the most heartening of my journey, is that rugby league has just been so welcoming as a sport. I did something. I went to Halifax Rugby League Club soon after I left Look North, and they were playing Batley. Proper rugby, that. And I went back into this room where we all were after the game. There was an older couple there, and we were just chatting about the game. And the woman put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Can I just say I'm a really big fan of what you've done? You've done really well." I said, "Oh, thank you. That's really lovely." And the bloke said, "Aye, you've done okay. I'm not going to lie. When you first get a woman doing sport, it wasn't right, but you've done okay." And I've always said, I could fancy that on my tombstone. Yeah, she did okay. And actually, that is the thing that I look back. And I wasn't aware of it really, because I was just trying to do the job, and we didn't have social media. But I think that bloke was pretty typical of probably what went on in a huge amount of sitting rooms up and down Yorkshire and Lincolnshire.
And what kept you pushing through that? Because that must have been quite difficult.
It was my job. Doing my job.
And that being your job, what kept you in that job? Because we can leave jobs, can't we? What kept you really pushing?
I liked it. I became very good at it. I probably wasn't great at it in the early days. I worked bloody hard at it in the early days. I became you become a more confident television maker. You work better with cameramen and editors. I became a good television maker. I was always very solid live. Actually was quite lazy in terms of, I'd say I'll go and do an outside broadcast because making a piece of telly requires your brain. I mean, so I could rock up and do it live for Look North. I loved the job. I genuinely loved the job. And I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, God, it was awful. And I was, I got abused left, right and centre. By the time the abuse did start to come with social media, I knew I could do my job, and I'd reached a level where I wasn't, that wasn't a doubt to me anymore. And I don't know if it's a woman thing or whether it everybody has it, but I think for me there was an element of persuading myself I could do the job. I had to persuade me. I had to convince me that I could do it before I would ever think that I could convince anybody else.
You did the Rob Burrows interview as well, and that must have been really hard, and you talked about that being one of the hardest but quite pivotal in your career. Can you talk us through that a little bit?
The hardest. I mean, interviews you never ever want to do, but did probably more good from that one interview than anything I'll ever do in my career. So obviously I've worked very, very closely with the Leeds Rhinos. Very odd. I was having my hair cut. Phone went, and it was a guy I was working with at the time who was on a WhatsApp group with Rob. Rob was a huge American football fan, And there was a Yorkshire group of them, mixture of rugby league and football people. And Rob was on this, and he rang me up and said, "Look, I'm just going to tell you this. I don't, just so you know, we're going to have to do something at some point." But Rob put on the WhatsApp group last night he's got MND. And my hairdresser would have known who he was. She knows enough about rugby league that she'd have known who he was. So you can't say anything. You can't, And it was like, right, okay. Compartmentalize, crack on, and sort of left the hairdresser and went for a walk. My husband and I went for a long walk, and phone went, and it was Phil Daly, the press officer, who, again, I've known for years and years and years, and his voice, I knew something was wrong. And he said to me, could you be here, could you be at Headingley tomorrow at midday with a camera crew? I can't tell you what it is. And I said, is it to do with the health of one of your former players? Because if it is, I've heard. And he sounded so relieved. I've no idea what would have happened if I hadn't known and I'd walked into that at midday and been told. The slightly strange thing that then happened was I've got to ring my newsroom, say, I need a cameraman. This is a non-negotiable at midday. I probably would like two, and it's your lead, but I'm not telling you what it is. So got in the next day. We went along. And it was one of those things, actually, when I said it out loud in the morning meeting, I think that's when it hit me, because it's often when you say something out loud, isn't it, that it's sort of, you go, oh, because you can't get the words out. So we all went into one of the hospitality boxes where we were going to do it. And the two cameramen started setting up, and Kev bounced in and said, it's shit, but it's going to be okay. And then kind of bounced back out the room. And it was like, right. And then he came back and he said, has anyone spoken to Rob recently? And we hadn't. He was with the academy by this point, and he hadn't been on the Super League show with us for a bit. And he said, it's his voice. He said, it's fine, you can understand him, but that's where you know about it. Right, okay. Yeah, it's like the thank you for warning. And we sat down to do the interview. And I always say to, if I'm doing anything with students or apprentices or anything, prepare for your interview. How do you prepare for that? I'd had a conversation with a friend of mine who'd been through some quite serious health stuff and said, if I asked you this, would you hit me? Type of thing. But Rob was incredible. Rob had, within the 72 hours or something that he'd done this, he'd been up to see Doddy. Kev had taken him to see Doddy, and that has very much shaped his standpoint from such an early stance of how he was going to deal with this. And he sort of led me to the question, which is the one about the family, which is where he broke down, and Kev obviously came in. To this day, I have no idea why I didn't cry, because a bloke crying, I'm off fairly instantly. We got to the end of the interview, and Kevin Phil said, we don't want you showing that, but it was Rob. He said, no, people have to see that. They need to see the reality of this, and that is the reality. And, he was from the very outset just incredible about the whole thing. We then had to get it copied for Sky and for Calendar, get the pieces out, do it for digital, all the rest of it. I was in and out of an edit suite. It's very, very hard to sit and watch it. I'd suddenly get up and go to the loo, or need to go and get some water, or just go for a wander. And we made the piece, and obviously it went out. And the digital went out, and I did something with 5 Live at the top of their program. And then it was our Christmas party. Which was I very much dipped in and out of it, but kept checking my phone, because the whole point at that point was to raise money for the family, the main breadwinner of the family. So, Kevin's clip on the piece had been about, what we need to do, the least we can do is make sure that Robbie's not worried about Lindsay and the kids when he's gone. And the Just Giving page, as it started to go out more on digital and on different things, was, ticking up. And I remember getting a message from Phil Daly saying, we've done a good thing today. And then we got to the end of the night, and this young lad called Will, he's not that young now, but he's fair bit taller than me, came up, put his arm around me, said, well done today. I said, oh, thanks, mate. I really appreciate that. And he said, thanks for shining a light on MND. And I thought, he must have been, he's 22, 23 at the time then. Well, I remember looking up at him, and he looked down and he went, my mum's got it. And that was it. floodgates open for me. But Rob, my God, by opening the doors in the way that he did. And then Lindsay wouldn't even got Lindsay anywhere near a television camera at the time that Rob got diagnosed. And look at her. I mean, what an incredible woman. So, yes, the short answer is yes, the biggest interview I've ever done, the most important interview I've ever done, but also the most humbling thing I have ever been involved with. And yeah, you ever think you're having a tough day, you go along to one of those support groups and yeah.
I can remember watching it and crying. So it was, quite emotional. And I've just been listening to Lindsay's book, actually, and she talks about you in there and that they chose you because they trusted you. You were a known quantity in the rugby league space. So, yeah, so congratulations on that, because that's...
I mean, I sort of, again, you don't... You look back on that and, I'm grateful that I did the job well and did the job, that they were happy with the job and that Rob trusted me to do it.
Yeah. And have you noticed a difference with the different sports and the community around? You've been drawn to that.
I think because they live in their community, they're not earning, there's some who'll earn a decent amount of money, but in this country, it's not a big sport. There is not a lot of money in it. So they are still living in their communities. They're very much part of their communities. And the foundations, the work that they do is very rooted in their communities. Football, it is different. The top end in particular, there is so much money. And there are some great people. I mean, I've been doing bits with Liverpool TV, and what their foundation does is absolutely brilliant work. But there is something about rugby league that it is just so rooted in where it's come from. And it's not kind of glitzy places or anything like that. How often does Castleford get mentioned on the BBC when it's not anything to do with rugby league? It gives it a focus. It is the focal point of what they're doing.
What do you consider to be a defining characteristic as a journalist?
Honesty. I don't think I was a great journalist in terms of there are certain stories I could have had and I told people not to say anything because it wouldn't do them any good. I might have got a story out of it, but it wouldn't have played well for them. I don't think there's one. If I'm going to be honest, I remember having some presenter training. I was kind of very much bottom. I had to fight to get a whole 10 minutes with this presenter. So she hadn't even looked at anything. And she said to me, "What do you want the viewers to know about you?" And what I thought internally is not broadcastable. But, I couldn't answer the question because basically nothing. Thank you very much. But it worried me that I couldn't answer the question. I probably fluffed around on it at the time. But so I went away and thought about it. And I thought, what I want them to know is that I am passionate and I love what I do, but it is not about me. And that's not a defining characteristic as a journalist, but it is a defining characteristic of how I have gone about my job, I think.
And you talked earlier about receiving abuse, and thank goodness we didn't have social media back then.
Yeah.
How did that impact on you?
So by the point that it, Twitter, as was, became a thing, I was very established, was in network, was doing the Super League show, all the rest of it. So to a large degree, it didn't have a deep impact on me because, I do know I've got a deeper voice than most women. It's not news to me. I don't really need you to tell me that. I never wanted it. And I don't know if it's a man or a woman thing or all of us that, you can have 20 things saying that was a great program, one slagging you off, and that's the one that sticks. There was one that said, "You've got more testosterone in your lanky frame than I've got in one of my balls." And we're not theoretically, as BBC staff, weren't allowed to respond to these. But I suggest you see a doctor about your inadequacies before blocking him.
Given the increase in misogyny and violence against women and girls just in broader society, what role do you think sport, particularly women's sport, plays in driving change in that?
I think it's been huge. I mean, I just on so many different levels. I think it's changed the conversation. I mean, it's taken women footballers, tennis players, only to talk about periods and should we be wearing white shorts, and I might not be at my best, let alone physically what that is doing to you. I mean, that's it's like hallelujah, that half the population's going through this, and I mean that's just on the basics of what's going on. I'm not sure. I think sport, it's given girls an outlet. It's given girls something to do. I mean, one of the things with sport, and I think particularly, I did a piece with some teenagers years ago. It was all about why did girls stop playing sport at 13. And an awful lot of it was fairly obvious. They don't want to get hot and sweaty. They're worried about what they look like. The boys take the mickey out of them. They want the hair to look good at the end of it. Are you providing proper showers and hair dryers and all that? A lot of it was based around that, and they were getting teased a lot. But it was also they didn't like, as you said, hockey and netball. So they tried them with some different sports. And football, it was before football was what football is now. So there's football, Zumba, and boxing. And they literally, all they did was line them up. One line had pads on, the others had gloves on, and they were just doing routines of hitting and stuff like that. And then they swap over. So we got to the end of this, and what did you enjoy? All of them loved the boxing, because believe it or not, we have aggression too. We're like that. And if you go and hit something, not someone, something, or you do something that's physical and gets rid of that, you feel better. And it's gone. And you can see clearly through the sort of fog of the anger and the hormones and everything that's going on in you. It releases stress and all the rest of it. And I think, it is now acceptable for women to do sports that were not deemed for women to do, but actually build your character, build your personality, but give you an outlet. And I think, particularly for teenage girls and teenage boys, massively important. Interestingly, I think sport might, flip side, play a bigger role for young men going forward, you would hope, in that it can teach them a huge amount, and hopefully knock the edges off some stuff. But I think it's given women a voice. There, and I come back to the Euros win, and that group of footballers have been incredible leaders, and I think will go on to be incredible leaders in whatever sphere they go into, which is great. But the flip side has been the whole kind of Joey Barton-esque thing with that it's also kind of heightened it on the other side, because it's a very public and visual thing to have a go at. I mean, one of the arguments I have never understood is that my boys' football team could beat you. Well, nobody ever said Dino Asher-Smith can't run 100 metres because Usain Bolt will always beat her. What a ridiculous conversation to have. A woman boxer, you don't want to put a woman boxer in a meter. That doesn't mean they can't do it. I mean, it's just ludicrous. It's a ludicrous conversation to even go down. Enjoy them for what they are. Stop trying to compare and celebrate some brilliant athletes and brilliant people.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think there's still misogyny?
Oh, God, yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I fear football is the one that leads the way with that. Football in this country is incredibly tribal. It's very, the crowds are still very male dominated. There are women in there, of course there are, but they're still very male dominated. They're still very white, actually, generally, if you look around a crowd, versus necessarily the players that are on the pitch, particularly in the men's game. So, yes, undoubtedly. I know, female colleagues of mine who've been through, some really horrible stuff. But then you've got, at the top end, you've got your Kelly Cates, your Gabby Logans, who people don't even question. They are just very, very good at what they do. But I think it's a societal problem that in football is maybe focused.
What do you think needs to change then?
I don't, you know what? There's an awful lot of people who need to look at themselves in the mirror. I mean, one of those things of, as a society, how do you change it? Because I think we've come around in a new circle. I'm not sure societally it's very difficult, isn't it? You make laws and then people fight against that, and then there's the whole conspiracy theory. One of the things social media has done is give a platform to stuff like that. So you just hope that as parents we bring our kids up not to be like that, and that young people who are coming through don't think like that. But I'm not sure there's a thing we can do. If you've got a suggestion, put it out there.
So I'm sure there's leading lights in sport as well, like yourself, trying to drive the change that's needed, even if we don't have the fundamental answers. Did you have any role models and people that you looked up to?
Yes and no, in terms of there were people. So Helen Rollason, any female journalist doing particularly in television, has Helen Rollason to thank, because she very much was the one that my God, I just think the glass ceiling was so thick. My head hurt by batching that. She did a biography and talked about being the first woman on doing Grandstand and all the rest of it. And when you're on television, you are, particularly as the presenter, you are purely the front person for a huge team of people. It's a beast, live sport TV. And you are, the people who have supported me and guided and been in the background have been immense. But we've all been, they've supported me. She talked, and I'm sure if you talk to her in real life, I never met her, but it became quite clear that there were an awful lot of people in the background who didn't think she should be on there. And that I can't imagine doing that job without all those people who were in your ears and not wanting you to be there. I mean, that is, so she, to her, we are very grateful. Ellie Oldroyd, I went and interviewed Ellie when I was a student, and remember her saying she was doing football. She'd do football reports at the time, and saying that she would still check the Sunday papers to make sure she'd got it right, that she'd read the game right. And that goes back to that piece of learning to trust yourself, that you and that actually was quite a useful thing for me to always have in the back of my mind, that people far better than me who've made it far higher went through that process. Hazel Irvine's been somebody that I've admired from afar, and is also one of the nicest people and most supportive. I used to meet her in Sheffield because she came to do the snooker and York, and saw her at a couple of Olympic Games, and just an immense person and so talented and so hardworking. But actually, the two really key people in certainly my rugby league life and obviously at the life I've worked at the highest level were men. So the guy that brought me in, called Carl Hicks, who oddly I'm now back working with a bit, and then a lovely guy that he handed over to in 2012 called Ali McIntyre. And Ali has properly been my mentor. They talk about the person who believed in you before you believed in yourself, and that was Ali for me.
Yeah. And how important is it to have not just male allies that support you, but mentors that really believe in you?
It's huge. I think it's huge in every walk of life. And it may not be. Role models is a really interesting one, because people hold sports people up as role models and they don't choose to be. And particularly in football, these are young guys that have been in an academy and they haven't lived life, a lot of them, and you're asking them to be a role model, and that's really hard. That's a really hard thing to ask somebody to be. And you look back on your own life and think, what was I like at 21 years old out like on it? But mentors is something that I think you can have a say in. You can ask to have a mentor. You can say that one doesn't work for me and pick a different one. Interesting, now I'm doing a lot more in business and stuff like that. I've done quite a lot with leadership and things like that. And that's a whole new fascinating area of conversation, because I'm sure you've found it, big organizations, an awful lot of them in lots of different walks of life. You've done that job, therefore you move to that job, and therefore you move to that job. So suddenly you find yourself leading. And you may not be any good at it. You may not be a leader of people. The people that can, are not few and far between. There are great leaders out there, but they may not be good at X, Y, and Z, but they may be good at that. So, and that's that. It's been an interesting thing to then look back at some other people I've had as bosses down the years versus, Ali in particular. I owe him masses. So do a lot of other people as well. Yeah.
And what do you think are the characteristics of a really good leader?
Somebody who's honest with you. So both Carl and Ali, if you made a mistake, if you messed up, you didn't, it wasn't brushed under the carpet, but there was a conversation of, have we given you the training that is there something that we should have done to make sure that that didn't happen, or was it just one of those things you learned? So there's an honest conversation, but then it's forgotten, then you move on. If you do it again, it comes back, but it's done, it's forgotten. We've had the conversation, on you go. There's giving you the opportunities, but also giving you the training, the support that you had, of we need to do this for you. But also, I think, including you as well in the conversations about, who should we have, what should we do, so that you're all part of it. But I'm not sure if I could do it. I don't know, because I've never been in that position. I've never put myself in that position. But, Ali in particular was just a really, really special person who, my God, he cared, heart and soul. And he did a few sports. It wasn't just rugby league that he led and nurtured talent. I think there's also got to be an acceptance that you will make mistakes. None of us are the finished article. Mark Chapman aside, possibly. People talk about imposter syndrome. I'm Mark Chapman stand-in, for God's sake. You want imposter syndrome? I give you Chappers, who's the best in the business. By a country, he's such a talented bloke. And I was his stand-in. But actually, I think what Ali made me realise was I wasn't Mark, but they trusted me to stand in for Mark, and that's pretty impressive. If Mark wasn't available, well, you knew it. And that actually, when you talk about imposter syndrome, I'm never quite convinced about it. I think we've all got it, but you're doing it. So no point thinking too long and hard about it.
Leaning into it, yeah. Fantastic. Do you get that sort of nervous belly when you're doing things? Yeah.
Yeah. and I'm all for it. I don't get the sick feeling anymore. But absolutely. And I love it. The adrenaline of being part of a live sports broadcast is huge. It's immense. And it's fabulous. And it's the closest I get, I suppose, to being a part of those things that I watched as a kid and dreamed about.
Fantastic. So what does all this sort of history, what does it mean for the next exciting phase of your career?
So I got to the end of the Rugby League World Cup and thought, I'm done, which was very odd. I kind of had in the back of my mind at the end of the Rugby League World Cup, I need to have a think about it. I've been doing it a long time. There's an element of a bedroll. You've got to give somebody else a go. It wasn't that I wasn't enjoying it. I didn't have that heart and soul feel about it anymore. Which didn't sit very well with me. I am a sort of look yourself in the mirror type of person of, are you giving it? And it wasn't that I wasn't doing a good job, but I wasn't kind of giving it what I had given it. I'm not sure you could actually keep going at that rate. But I was doing, I got to the run up to the final when it finally slowed down. I went, I don't want to go back. I'm done. So I went in and resigned. Didn't get payout. Didn't have a plan. Still don't really have a plan. But I'm loving the variety of what I'm doing. I still get to go and do rugby league, which I love. I'm doing quite a lot with Climb UK, which is it is a 2-day event in Leeds, but it's becoming so much more than that. We're doing a podcast series called Conversations at the Summit. And we've been talking to investors, founders, leaders, HR, employment law, marketing, and I'm loving that. My job is to get their story in the same way you're kind of probing me. But then I've also got Gordon Bateman, who is the man behind Climb, in there as well, who's got a knowledge. And I'm loving that. They're absolutely fascinating, especially actually the leadership piece.
Fascinating. You talked about adrenaline and enjoying that. How do you get that in your personal life as well, if you're not necessarily going to get that in your day job as much?
I don't think I do. I mean, I do sport in terms of I running. Oddly, one of the things I've really loved in the last few years is weights. So I took up, there's a personal trainer who lives in my village, which sounds really fancy, but he's got a single garage, not that much bigger than the room we're sitting in here, kitted out. And women, as you get older, you should be doing weights. Really, really important for your bone density.
There is something about feeling strong, isn't
Yeah.
there? Yeah. I do weights as well, and it's that feeling of like...
And you go
strong.
back to the whole women, back in 2012, when we'd had, Jess Ennis, Rebecca Adlington, Nicola Adams, etc., and BBC Sports Awards, which was immense that year, I got to go. It was huge. And it was such a cracking event. And the Daily Mail got a female writer to write about, Rebecca Adlington's shoulders are too big to wear that dress. Jessica Ennis is too muscular to wear that. Nicola Adams is wearing a trouser suit. And it just made me... I don't normally, but that was one where you just wanted to go, how dare you? That made me properly blood boil.
It would have me, yeah. Something we ask everyone is, what would you tell your younger self?
Your voice will end up actually being the thing that distinguishes you from the crowd. I think probably you'll find yourself. It'll take a while, but you'll find yourself. Don't worry about it. What would you say to your younger self? There's so many things. But it'll be right. You'll do okay. You'll do okay.
In a Yorkshire accent.
Yeah. It'll be right. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Well, we, as a Yorkshire person, it's fantastic to adopt you into the wonderful county.
Have I done okay?
You've done all right. Thanks for listening to Against the Tide, brought to you by Think for Wellbeing, the social change-making organisation. With thanks to Louise Kavanagh at Purposeful Marketing and the team at Sticks and Glass. Subscribe to Against the Tide wherever you get your podcasts so you will never miss an inspiring episode.